Abigail Reed's breath formed small clouds in the frigid Montana air. Her body trembled, not just from the January cold that had settled into her bones, but from a fever that made the snowflakes around her blur into a white haze. She felt herself slipping, falling, the frozen ground rising to meet her. Strong arms caught her before she hit the snow. Through half-lidded eyes, she saw a bearded face, concern etched across weathered features. Samuel Thornton held her against his chest, his heartbeat steady against her ear as consciousness faded in and out. "Don't die," he whispered, his voice breaking as he trudged through knee-deep snow. "You haven't told me your story yet." Abigail's mind floated somewhere between awareness and darkness. Her cracked lips parted. "Sarah, she left me, like broken furniture." Samuel clutched her tighter, his pace quickening. The outline of a cabin appeared through the swirling snow. Salvation, if he could reach it in time. Abigail's skin was cold as ice, her breathing shallow. With each labored step, memories of battlefield casualties haunted him. How many had he lost like this? How many had he carried only to watch them slip away? "Not you," he murmured, kicking open the cabin door. "Not you too." 2 months earlier, the November wind cut through Abigail's worn shawl as she stood beside the hitching post outside Willow Creek Trading Post. Her carpet bag rested at her feet, a pathetic collection of belongings for a woman of 63 years. She raised her hand in a frozen wave as the covered wagon disappeared around the bend, taking her daughter Sarah and son-in-law Charles Pembroke with it. Only they weren't taking her with them. That had been the promise, that Sarah would collect her mother, bring her to live with them in their fine Kansas City home. Instead, they deposited her here, at this remote trading post with $20 and vague directions to a boarding house that Abigail was beginning to suspect didn't exist. The crowd around her, miners with dirt-creased faces, trappers in animal skins, a farmer's wife adjusting her bonnet, all pretended not to notice. But Abigail felt their stares, their whispers. The shame of abandonment burned hotter than any winter chill. Florence Hewitt, the trading post owner's wife, swept the porch nearby, her eyes occasionally darting to Abigail with something between pity and discomfort. "We close at sundown," she finally said, nodding toward the mountains where the sun was already beginning its descent. Abigail nodded, her spine ramrod straight despite the hollow ache spreading through her chest. 12 years a widow, a lifetime of sacrifice. She'd sold their farm to pay for Sarah's education at that fancy Boston finishing school. She'd worn the same 2 dresses for 5 years, so Sarah could have new ones. She'd written letters every week when Sarah married Charles, even when the replies grew shorter, colder, and eventually stopped altogether. And now this, left on a bench like unwanted baggage. The trading post slowly emptied as daylight faded. One by one, wagons and horses departed until Abigail sat alone, the only sound the creak of the porch swing and the distant howl of wolves. Frost formed on the railing. The temperature dropped sharply as darkness fell. Abigail's fingers found the wooden cross in her pocket, carved by Thomas's hands before the mine collapse that took him. She gripped it until the edges bit into her palm. Perhaps she should walk to town, but Willow Creek proper was 5 miles away, and night was falling fast. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her life as the caregiver, first as a teacher to the children of Blackwater, then to her sister Martha's baby after Martha died in childbirth, raising Sarah as her own, then caring for Thomas until the day the mine took him. Always the strong one, always the giver. Now here she sat, alone, unwanted, forgotten. The trading post door opened, spilling golden lamplight onto the porch. A tall man stepped out, arms loaded with winter supplies, flour, coffee, ammunition. He paused mid-stride when he saw her still sitting there, her bag untouched, frost gathering on her shawl. Florence was locking up behind him, deliberately avoiding looking in Abigail's direction. The man studied her, his dark eyes sharp under the brim of his hat. He wore a heavy coat patched in several places, boots worn but serviceable, not wealthy but not desperate either. He set his supplies in a nearby wagon and approached. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Forgive me, but you look familiar." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. You couldn't be Miss Reed from Blackwater Schoolhouse?" Abigail looked up, startled. The face before her was bearded and weathered, but something in the eyes. I was misread once, yes. She straightened her shoulders. I don't recall. Sam Thornton, he said with a slight smile. Though you called me Samuel. Said a man's full name was a gift from his mother and shouldn't be shortened. Recognition dawned slowly. Samuel Thornton, the boy who always asked about the stars. The memory surfaced, a skinny child with serious eyes who stayed after lessons to ask about constellations, who brought her wildflowers in spring. The very same. His smile faded as he glanced at her bag, the empty bench, the locked trading post. Understanding crossed his features. You've been left here. It wasn't a question. Abigail felt her throat tighten but refused to show weakness. My daughter had an urgent matter in Kansas City. Arrangements were made for lodging, but there seems to have been some confusion. Samuel's jaw tightened. There's no boarding house in Willow Creek, ma'am. Never has been. The final thread of hope snapped. Sarah had abandoned her, plain and simple. Samuel shifted his weight, looking toward his wagon, then back at Abigail. I have a cabin about 12 miles north, room enough. You're welcome to winter there. I don't take charity, Mr. Thornton, Abigail said, her voice brittle with pride. It's not charity, Samuel replied evenly. I need help with mending, cooking. You need shelter. Fair trade. Abigail studied him. The boy she'd taught had become a man with lines around his eyes that spoke of hardship, but those eyes themselves remained kind. Why would you help a stranger, she asked, though they both knew she wasn't truly a stranger. Something shifted in Samuel's expression. Because someone should have helped my mama when she was alone, and nobody did. The words held weight, the kind that comes from carrying a burden too long. Abigail's decision was made for her as the first snowflakes began to fall. She stood slowly, joints stiff from sitting so long in the cold. My name is Abigail Reed now. I'm married. Samuel Thornton, he said again, extending a gloved hand. Still the same. Her palm met his in a handshake that was firm. Equal, not savior and victim, but partners in survival. The wagon journey through deepening snow was mostly silent. Abigail clutched her shawl tighter as the wind picked up, driving icy particles against her face. Samuel occasionally pointed out landmarks. A lightning-struck pine, a stream now frozen solid, the distant mountains that marked the territory boundary. Been in these parts long? She asked when the silence grew too heavy. 8 years this winter, Samuel replied, keeping his eyes on the trail. Came west after the war. The war? Abigail glanced at him with new understanding. He would have been the right age for the Civil War. You served. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Army surgeon, saw things no man should see. Abigail nodded, recognizing the tone. She'd taught enough boys who'd returned as broken men. My Thomas died in a mine collapse 10 years ago, she offered. I raised Sarah alone after that, sold our land to send her to finishing school in Boston. Samuel listened without interrupting as Abigail continued. She married a banker, Charles Pembroke, moved to Kansas City. Her voice remained steady, practiced. The letters came less and less. Then last month a telegram saying they were passing through Montana would collect me. She stopped, her voice catching. I thought she wanted me to live with her family. Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. Dropped you at that bench like luggage, didn't even say goodbye. It wasn't a question. No, Abigail whispered. She didn't. Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd seen cruelty before. Men who beat horses, bosses who cheated workers, soldiers who took pleasure in killing. But a daughter abandoning her elderly mother in winter, that was a different kind of evil. My wife died in childbirth 5 years ago, he said after a long silence. The baby too. A boy. His voice dropped. Never even drew breath. Abigail looked at him, really looked, the set of his shoulders, the grief etched in lines around his mouth. I'm sorry. Been alone since, Samuel continued. Just surviving, not living. Figured I had nothing left to give anyone. He glanced at her, then back at the snowy trail. Reckon I was wrong. The cabin appeared through the trees, small but solid. Smoke curled from the chimney. Samuel had banked the fire that morning. A small barn stood nearby, a milk cow visible through the open door. Beyond that, a chicken coop, barely visible in the growing darkness. It isn't much, Samuel said, pulling the wagon to a stop, but it's honest. Abigail stared at the cabin, Lamplight glowed in the window, warm and inviting. A home. It's more than I had an hour ago, she said softly. Samuel climbed down and offered his hand. She took it, stepping carefully onto the frozen ground. He grabbed her bag and led her to the door. She hesitated at the threshold. Behind her lay the old life, the daughter who didn't want her, the land she'd lost, the loneliness she'd carried for 10 years. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also warmth, safety, a man who understood loss without trying to fix it. Abigail stepped inside. The cabin was simply furnished but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling behind an iron grate. A table with 2 chairs stood in the center, set with plain ceramic dishes. A cast iron stove occupied one corner, shelves above it stocked with basic provisions. Against the far wall stood a bed with a patchwork quilt, a trunk at its foot. A rocking chair near the fire completed the scene. "You take the bed," Samuel said, setting down her bag. "I'll sleep in the barn loft." "I can't." "You can," he said firmly, "and you will. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." Abigail's throat tightened. She nodded, not trusting her voice. When Samuel stepped outside to tend to the horses, she sank into the rocking chair by the fire, allowing the warmth to seep into her bones. Only then, alone in the quiet cabin, did Abigail permit herself to cry. Silent tears for everything she'd lost, but also, impossibly, tears of relief. She wasn't alone anymore. The first week passed in careful politeness. Abigail cooked biscuits and stew from the venison Samuel brought from hunting. She swept the cabin floor, organized shelves, brought order to the chaos of bachelor living. Samuel repaired the roof, reinforced the barn door, taught her to shoot his rifle in case I'm gone and something comes around, he explained. They spoke little at first. Meals were quiet affairs punctuated by, "Thank you for breakfast," and "Sleep well." Small courtesies that felt enormous after so much silence. True to his word, Samuel had moved his bedroll to the barn loft, insisting Abigail keep the bed despite her protests. Abigail was mending one of Samuel's shirts by lamplight when she noticed the stitches. Previous repairs, dozens of them, carefully done but visible nonetheless. The garment had been mended so many times it was more patch than original fabric. She ran her fingers over the rough cotton, imagining Samuel sitting alone in this cabin, needle in his large hands, stubbornly keeping his few possessions functional. Her explorations of the cabin revealed other insights. The bookshelves contained volumes on medicine, anatomy, battlefield surgery, not the usual fare for a mountain man. A wooden box under the bed was locked, its key nowhere to be found. In the corner, a desk with drawers Samuel had politely asked her not to open. Secrets. The man had secrets. One afternoon while Samuel was hunting, Abigail moved the rug to sweep and discovered a loose floorboard. Curiosity overcame propriety. She pried it up and found a leather-bound journal. A medical log filled with precise handwriting, documenting injuries, treatments, outcomes. Most disturbing were the lists of names, dozens of them, each with the notation "deceased" beside them. The last entries were dated 1865, the final year of the war. She was replacing the journal when Samuel's voice came from the doorway. "Find anything interesting?" Abigail jumped, nearly dropping the floorboard. "I was sweeping," she said, flustered. "The board was loose." Samuel crossed the room, kneeling to take the board from her hands. His face was unreadable as he fitted it back into place. "War relics," he said quietly. "Best left buried." "You were more than just a surgeon," Abigail said, understanding dawning. "You were a field doctor. On the front lines." Samuel stood, turning away. "I was a butcher with a medical license," he said, his voice flat. "Men died under my hands by the dozen. Some I couldn't save. Others," he stopped, shoulders tight. "Others I shouldn't have saved, just prolonged their suffering." Abigail rose, taking a step toward him. "You did your duty." "My duty." Samuel's laugh was bitter. "My duty was to heal. Instead, I just kept men alive long enough to send them back to die in different ways." He moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. "That's why I came out here, far from people, far from responsibilities, far from the chance to fail someone else. Yet you took me in," Abigail said softly. Samuel turned, his eyes meeting hers. "Maybe that's my penance. Before Abigail could respond, Samuel grabbed his coat. Needed to check the traps before dark, he said, and was gone, leaving her alone with more questions than answers. Later that night, after a silent dinner, Abigail found a small wooden box on her pillow. Inside was a silver hairpin with a small pearl, simple but elegant. Beneath it, a folded note in careful handwriting. Belonged to my mother, suits you better than her jewelry box. Abigail held the pin to the lamplight, touched by the gesture. As she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin. Gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, lines etched around her eyes and mouth, skin weathered by years of prairie winds. When had she grown so old? She removed the pins holding her hair, letting the silver-streaked strands fall past her shoulders. After a moment's hesitation, she placed Samuel's gift at her temple, securing a lock of hair behind her ear. The effect softened her features, reminded her of the young teacher she'd once been. From outside came the sound of an axe splitting wood, rhythmic, powerful strokes in the darkness. Samuel, working by lantern light, preparing for the winter ahead, preparing for her comfort. Abigail extinguished the lamp and slipped under the quilt, listening to the steady thunk of the axe. For the first time since Sarah's wagon had disappeared around the bend, she felt something other than abandonment, something dangerously close to belonging. The days shortened as November deepened toward December. Snow fell more frequently, transforming the landscape into a white wilderness. Abigail settled into a routine, cooking, cleaning, mending. She discovered a talent for stretching their provisions, making hearty soups from seemingly nothing, preserving what they had. She also discovered more about Samuel, how he hung his coat on the left peg, always, how he read by the fire each night, medical journals mostly, how he sometimes woke shouting names she didn't recognize, soldiers, she guessed, men he couldn't save. On those nights, she would make tea, leaving a steaming cup by his door without comment. By morning, the cup would be washed and returned to its shelf, the only acknowledgement of their unspoken arrangement. One evening as they sat by the fire, Samuel reading, Abigail knitting, a sharp knock broke the silence. Samuel was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he murmured, moving to the window. He peered out, then relaxed slightly. "Ezra Harper," he said, old miner. Samuel opened the door to reveal a weathered man in his 70s, snow covering his shoulders. "Evening, Doc," the man said, then spotted Abigail and hesitated. "Didn't know you had company." "Mrs. Reed is staying for the winter," Samuel said, stepping aside. "Come in, Ezra. You're letting the heat out." Ezra shuffled in, removing his hat. "Begging your pardon, ma'am. Wouldn't have come if it weren't urgent." He turned to Samuel. "It's my grandson. Fever's bad. Hannah sent me to fetch you." Samuel's face tightened. "Ezra, I don't practice anymore. You know that." "Boy's burning up, raving. Doc Powell's in Helena till spring." Ezra's voice broke. "Please, Sam, just this once." Abigail watched Samuel's internal struggle play across his features, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "I'll get my bag," he finally said, turning toward the locked cabinet Abigail had noticed before. He extracted a key from his pocket, opening it to reveal medical instruments, neatly arranged by pennyphrase. Beside them sat a doctor's bag, worn but well-maintained. As Samuel packed supplies, Abigail gathered her shawl. "I'm coming with you," she said when Samuel looked up questioningly. "A sick child needs more than medicine." To her surprise, Samuel didn't argue. "Dress warmly," was all he said. "It's 3 miles to Ezra's homestead." The journey through moonlit snow was arduous. They rode double on Samuel's horse, Abigail seated behind him, arms around his waist for balance. The night was brutally cold, their breath forming clouds in the air. Ezra's homestead was a small affair, a main cabin with a lean-to addition. A woman met them at the door, her face lined with worry. "Hannah," Samuel nodded as he dismounted, helping Abigail down. "Where is he?" She led them inside to where a boy of about 8 lay on a pallet, his face flushed with fever. Samuel knelt beside him, professional detachment replacing his earlier reluctance. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking pulse, temperature, eyes. "How long has he been like this?" Samuel asked, opening his bag. 3 days, Hannah replied. "Started with a cough, then the fever came." Samuel nodded, extracting a stethoscope. Pneumonia, most likely. Has he coughed up anything? As Samuel examined the boy, Abigail took charge of the practical matters. She heated water, prepared cool cloths for the child's forehead, organized Samuel's instruments as he called for them. It was a dance they fell into naturally, as if they'd worked together for years rather than knowing each other mere weeks. Hours passed as Samuel administered medicines. Abigail bathed the child's fevered skin, and the grandparents watched anxiously. Near dawn, the fever broke. The boy's breathing eased. He slept naturally for the first time in days. Samuel packed his instruments, his movements slow with exhaustion. Keep him warm, clear broth when he wakes. I'll leave medicine for the cough. Hannah clutched his hand. God bless you, doctor. Samuel flinched at the title but didn't correct her. Outside, as Ezra helped them prepare to leave, the old miner pressed a small pouch into Samuel's hand. It's not much. I don't want payment, Samuel said, trying to return it. It's not for the doctoring, Ezra insisted. It's for the secret. Folks in town don't need to know you're practicing again. Samuel hesitated, then nodded, pocketing the pouch. As they rode away, Abigail felt his tension in the set of his shoulders. Why do you hide it? She asked when they were well away from the homestead. You have a gift. That boy might have died without you. Samuel was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. I made a vow, he finally said. After the war, after my wife, I'd never practice again. Why? Because I couldn't save them, he said simply. Couldn't save the men under my care. Couldn't save my wife when she hemorrhaged. Couldn't save my son. His voice broke. What kind of doctor can't protect his own family? Abigail rested her cheek against his back, feeling his pain in the rigid line of his spine. The human kind, she said softly. The kind who tries, the kind who loves them. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but something had shifted between them. A trust had formed in that sick room, watching each other work, an understanding. When they reached the cabin, Samuel helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. Their eyes met in the pre-dawn light, exhaustion mingling with something else, something neither was ready to name. You should rest, Abigail said, breaking the moment. I'll make breakfast later. Samuel nodded, leading the horse toward the barn. Abigail watched him go, this complicated man with his secrets and his pain and his unexpected kindness. That night, she found the locked wooden box from beneath the bed sitting on the table, its key beside it, an invitation, a test. She waited until Samuel had gone to the barn before opening it. Inside was a photograph. Samuel in an army surgeon's uniform, standing among a group of doctors. He looked younger, his beard shorter, his eyes haunted even then. Beneath it lay another photograph that made her breath catch, a formal school portrait, taken in front of Blackwater Schoolhouse 30 years ago. Teacher and pupils arranged in neat rows, Abigail standing tall and proud in the center, a young woman in her 30s then. And there in the back row, a serious-faced boy, Samuel Thornton. He had recognized her from the beginning, had known exactly who she was when he found her at the trading post. But there was more. Beneath the photographs lay a letter, its paper yellowed with age, the handwriting achingly familiar. Thomas, her Thomas, written during his final days. With trembling fingers, Abigail unfolded it. My dearest Abby, if you are reading this, then Dr. Thornton has found you. I pray it hasn't been too long since I left this world. The mind collapse did not kill me instantly as you were told. I lingered for 3 days under Dr. Thornton's care. I must tell you 2 things before I joined my maker. First, I discovered a gold vein on our property, hidden in the North Ridge. I've enclosed a map. I kept it secret, fearing the mining company would force us out if they knew. This gold belongs to you and Sarah. Use it wisely. Second, I know about Sarah. I've always known she wasn't our blood. I found Martha's journal years ago. I want you to know I loved her as my own from the first moment. Her parentage never mattered to me. Tell her the truth when she's old enough to understand. Don't let her discover it by accident as I did. I go to my rest loving you as I always have, grateful for our years together. If you find happiness again someday, seize it with both hands. You deserve joy, Abby. Until we meet again. Thomas A. map was indeed folded within, detailed markings of their old property, with an X clearly indicating the gold vein's location. Abigail sat unmoving, tears streaming down her face. Thomas had known about Sarah all along, had kept her secret, loving them both despite the deception. And Samuel had been there in Thomas's final moments, had been entrusted with this letter, this map, had promised to find her. The cabin door opened, letting in a blast of cold air. Samuel stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, uncertainty in his eyes. "You knew him," Abigail said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were with my husband when he died." Samuel closed the door, removing his hat. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me? Why keep this letter all these years?" "I tried to find you," Samuel said, remaining by the door, as if unsure of his welcome. "After the war, I went to Blackwater. You were gone, the land sold. No one knew where you'd settled. And Sarah? Did you try to find her?" "I did." Samuel moved closer, warming his hands by the fire. "Traced her to Boston, then lost the trail when she married. It was only by chance I saw her name in a newspaper last year, a society piece about Charles Pembroke and his wife, the former Sarah Reed." "You knew she would come through Willow Creek," Abigail realized. "That's why you were there that day." Samuel nodded. "I've been watching the trading post for weeks, waiting, hoping to give you Thomas's letter, fulfill my promise." He hesitated. "I never expected her to leave you there." Abigail looked down at the letter in her hands, then at the map. "The gold, this land is long gone. I sold it to pay for Sarah's schooling." "I know." Samuel knelt before her, his eyes level with hers. "The Frontier Mining Company owns it now. They've been buying up all the land in that area." A cold realization washed over Abigail. "Charles Pembroke, he's an investor in mining ventures." Samuel nodded grimly, "the largest shareholder in Frontier Mining." "Sarah knew," Abigail whispered, the pieces falling into place. "She must have known about the gold, about the letter." The betrayal cut deeper than the abandonment, not just left behind, but deliberately removed so she couldn't interfere with their plans. "I'm sorry, Abigail," Samuel said, genuine anguish in his voice. "I never meant to bring you pain." "No," she said, straightening her spine. "The pain was already there. You've brought me truth." She looked into his eyes. "Why did you really take me in, Samuel? Was it just to fulfill your promise to Thomas?" Samuel held her gaze. "At first, perhaps, but then I recognized you. The teacher who changed my life. The woman who stopped my parents from sending me to an orphanage after the fever took my sisters. Who convinced them I was worth keeping." His voice softened. "I owed you my life long before I owed Thomas my word." Abigail reached out, her hand touching his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. "So many connections, so many years. So many secrets," Samuel finished for her. "Too many. They stayed like that, connected by touch and truth and shared history as the fire crackled and night deepened around the small cabin. Outside, the first blizzard of winter began to howl, rattling the windows and blanketing the world in white. Inside, two souls long separated by circumstance found themselves bound together by fate and a letter from beyond the grave. The blizzard that began that night raged for 3 days, transforming the landscape into an endless sea of white. Drifts piled against the cabin walls, climbing halfway up the windows. The temperature plummeted, turning breath to frost inside the cabin despite the roaring fire Samuel maintained day and night. It was impossible for him to make the journey to the barn in such conditions. Without discussion, they rearranged their living situation, Samuel sleeping on a pallet by the fire, Abigail keeping the bed. The forced proximity broke something open between them. On the second night, with wind howling like lost souls outside, Samuel spoke of his wife. "Her name was Eleanor," he said, voice barely audible above the storm. "She was a nurse during the war. That's how we met, elbow deep in blood, trying to save a boy who'd lost both legs to a cannonball." Abigail sat in the rocking chair, knitting needles moving steadily as she listened. "She had this laugh," Samuel continued, staring into the flames, "like music. Even in that hellscape, she could find reasons to laugh." His voice softened. "She wanted 6 children, a big family, said she'd been an only child and hated the loneliness." He fell silent for so long Abigail thought he might be finished. Then, "The bleeding started in the night. Nothing I did could stop it." The raw pain in his voice made Abigail's hands still. "I was a battlefield surgeon. I'd stopped hemorrhages before, but I couldn't save her. The baby? Abigail asked gently. A boy, 2 months early, lived 3 days. Samuel's face was a mask of controlled anguish. I couldn't save him either. What kind of man can't protect his own family? Abigail set aside her knitting and moved to sit beside him on the floor, close enough that their shoulders touched. The kind who tried, she said, the kind who loved them. That's all any of us can do. Samuel's hand found hers in the firelight, fingers intertwining. They sat like that for a long time, connected, watching flames dance and shadows play across the cabin walls. I started building a cradle, Samuel said eventually, when Eleanor told me she was expecting. Never finished it after. He cleared his throat. It's still in the shed. Couldn't finish it. Couldn't burn it either. Abigail squeezed his hand. You loved her deeply. Still do. Yes, Samuel turned to face her, his eyes reflecting firelight. But I'm tired of haunting my own life. That night, Samuel moved his pallet closer to her bed, still separate, still respectful. But the distance between them had shrunk, not just in physical space, but in the chambers of their hearts. Abigail lay awake, listening to his breathing, feeling something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. On the fourth day the storm finally broke. The world outside was transformed. Pristine white drifts sculpted by wind, trees heavy with snow, the sky a clear, piercing blue. The temperature remained brutal, but at least visibility had returned. Samuel spent the morning digging paths to the barn and chicken coop, checking on the animals, bringing in firewood. Abigail baked bread, the homey smell filling the cabin as she watched him through the window. She observed how he paused to feed a small herd of deer that had ventured close to the cabin, scattering corn in a sheltered spot beneath the pines. His gentleness with the animals touched something in her. This man who carried such pain, still capable of such kindness. When he returned, stomping snow from his boots, his cheeks were red with cold, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in days. Need to ride into town, he said, hanging his coat to dry. We're low on flour and coffee. Storm's passed enough to make the journey. Be careful, Abigail said, surprising herself with the concern in her voice. Samuel paused, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Always am, he replied softly. After he'd gone, Abigail found herself drawn to the small shed attached to the cabin's rear. She'd never explored it, respecting Samuel's privacy. But now, knowing about the cradle, she felt compelled to see it. The shed was neat as the cabin, tools hanging on pegs, supplies stacked on shelves. In the corner, covered with a cloth, stood the cradle, half finished, the wood sanded smooth. She ran her fingers over it, feeling the care in every curve. It would have been beautiful. Beside it, a trunk sat padlocked. Normally, Abigail would never pry, but their recent revelations had created a new openness between them. Using a hairpin, she managed to work the simple lock open. Inside were medical journals, a stethoscope, surgical instruments wrapped in cloth, the tools of Samuel's former profession. But beneath them lay something unexpected, a ledger filled with names, dates, and treatments. All recent, all within the past year. Patients, dozens of them. Samuel had been practicing medicine all along, secretly it seemed. Entries described treating minors for injuries, children for fevers, women in childbirth. Many noted no payment, food accepted, or simply gratis. He'd been healing people despite his vow, despite his pain. Serving those who couldn't afford the town doctor, those on remote homesteads, those society overlooked. Abigail replaced everything carefully, relocking the trunk. When Samuel returned that evening, cheeks ruddy from the cold, she didn't mention her discovery. Some secrets were meant to be revealed in their own time. Brought something for you, Samuel said, unpacking his saddlebags. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Abigail unwrapped it to find a journal with a leather cover, and beside it, a fountain pen. Thought you might like to write, he explained, suddenly awkward. You mentioned teaching. Figured you might miss words. The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. Thank you, she said simply, running her fingers over the smooth cover. There's news in town, Samuel continued, changing the subject as he stowed supplies. Frontier mining is expanding operations, buying up more land. Charles's company, Abigail said, her happiness dimming. Samuel nodded grimly. They're not being gentle about it either. Some folks are getting pressured to sell. Ezra says they've hired men to persuade those who resist. Surely the law's 3 days right away, Samuel interrupted, and the sheriff owns shares in the company. Abigail sank into a chair, the implications settling over her. And Sarah is part of this, my own daughter. Samuel's expression softened. You never told me. When did you take Sarah in? After your sister passed. Abigail looked up startled. How did you know she wasn't my natural child? Thomas's letter mentioned it, Samuel said gently, that he knew she wasn't your blood. Abigail sighed, shoulders slumping. The secret she'd carried for nearly 4 decades, now spoken aloud twice in 1 week. Martha, my sister, died in childbirth when Sarah was born. She was involved with a man from town. A married man. Abigail's hands twisted in her lap. But not just any man. He was half Blackfoot. Understanding dawned in Samuel's eyes. Troy is mixed blood. Abigail nodded. You can see it if you know to look. Her darker complexion, her straight black hair. We always said she took after Thomas's side. She gave a bitter laugh. In those days, a half-Indian child would have faced. She couldn't finish. So you claimed her as your own, Samuel said. Raised her as your daughter. I loved her as my own from the first moment, Abigail said fiercely. I never thought of her as anything but my child, but I never told her the truth either. Her voice broke. I thought I was protecting her. You were, Samuel assured her. But she found out anyway, Abigail whispered. And now she hates me for the lie. Samuel moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. You gave her everything, Abigail. Your home, your love, your future. If she can't see the gift in that, the failing is hers, not yours. Abigail looked into his eyes, seeing no judgment, only compassion. When did you get so wise, Samuel Thornton? A small smile touched his lips. Had a good teacher once. December deepened, the days growing shorter, the nights colder. Christmas approached, bringing with it a bittersweet melancholy. Abigail hadn't celebrated properly since Thomas died, and she doubted Samuel had marked the day since losing Eleanor. Yet something made her want to acknowledge the season. Perhaps it was the quiet joy building between them, or simply the desire to make their shared solitude festive. While Samuel was checking his trap lines, Abigail ventured into the pine grove near the cabin. She gathered branches, breathing in their sharp, clean scent. Back inside, she arranged them on the mantel, weaving in red berries she'd dried in the fall. From scraps of fabric, she fashioned simple ornaments. Stars and hearts she hung from the branches with twine. She baked gingerbread, filling the cabin with spicy warmth, and placed candles in the windows. When Samuel returned, arms full of firewood, he stopped in the doorway, staring at the transformation. It's not much, Abigail said, suddenly shy. Just a touch of Christmas. Samuel set down the wood, moving to the decorated mantel. He touched a fabric star with gentle fingers. Eleanor used to do this, he said softly. Pine boughs and candles. Instead of pain, his voice held warmth. A good memory, not a haunting one. If it's too much, Abigail began. It's perfect, Samuel interrupted. Reminds me there's still beauty in the world. He turned to her, something new in his eyes. Thank you. On Christmas Eve, Samuel rode to town and returned with small luxuries. Peppermint sticks, dried apples, a sack of sugar. They were alone, isolated by snow and miles from town. It felt like their own world, safe, suspended in time. They exchanged gifts that evening. Samuel gave her the carved bird first, wings spread wide. So you remember you're free, he said, eyes serious. You're not trapped here. You can leave any time. He hesitated, then added quietly, but I hope you stay. Abigail's throat tightened. She handed him her gifts. Wool socks she'd knitted from yarn unraveled from an old sweater, and a small book she'd created from paper scraps, filled with medicinal recipes she'd copied from his texts, adding her own notes on herbs and treatments. You were freezing in that barn, she said of the socks. And for the book, perhaps it's time you practiced openly again. You have too much to give to hide it away. Samuel stared at the gifts like they were gold. Abigail, he seemed at a loss for words. No one's taken care of you, she said softly. Not in a long time. Let me. His eyes met hers and the space between them felt charged, electric. He leaned forward slightly. She did the same. Their breath mingled in the small space between them. Then Abigail's breath caught, a cough, then another. By evening, she was burning with fever. Samuel moved into action like a general, his doctor's training overriding everything else. Cold compresses, willow bark tea, broth he made from scratch. He sat beside the bed all night, changing the cloth on her forehead, holding her hand when she thrashed with fever dreams. The sickness settled in her lungs. Pneumonia, deadly at her age. Samuel fought it with everything he had, using medicines from his locked cabinet, brewing herbal remedies, barely sleeping for 3 days. In her delirium, Abigail called out names: Thomas, Sarah, Martha, and increasingly Samuel. Sometimes she spoke to him as the boy he'd been, giving lessons about stars and poetry. Other times she seemed aware of him as he was now, clutching his hand and begging him not to leave. "I'm right here," he would assure her, his voice steady despite his fear. "I'm not going anywhere." On the third night, when her fever peaked, Samuel did something he hadn't done since Eleanor died. He prayed. "Please," he whispered to whatever might be listening, his forehead pressed against Abigail's fevered hand. "Not her, too. I can't lose anyone else. He stopped, the word caught in his throat, but in the silence of his heart, he finished it. "Love. I can't lose anyone else I love." When the fever broke before dawn, Samuel wept with relief. Exhausted, he fell asleep in the chair beside her bed, head tilted at an awkward angle, hands still wrapped around hers. Abigail woke to watery winter sunlight filtering through the curtains. Her body felt wrung out, weak as a newborn calf, but her mind was clear for the first time in days. She turned her head to find Samuel asleep beside her, stubble darkening his jaw, lines of worry etched around his eyes even in sleep. "Samuel," she whispered. He startled awake instantly. "What do you need, water? Medicine? Why are you so kind to me?" The question had been building in her since the day he'd found her at the trading post. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Maybe God sent you, Abigail. Maybe you're the answer to a prayer I stopped praying." Her defenses crumbled under the weight of his sincerity. "I'm not an answer, Samuel. I'm just a woman left on a bench." "No." He leaned forward, intense. "You're the bravest soul I ever met. You survived when you had every reason to quit. You walked into a stranger's cabin and made it a home. You gave me something to wake up for." "What are we doing?" she asked, voice trembling. "Surviving," he said simply. "Together. Is that a sin?" She didn't answer, didn't know how. But when he stood to make breakfast, she didn't let go of his hand right away. And that, more than words, was answer enough. As January arrived with brutal cold, Abigail regained her strength slowly. Samuel hovered, ensuring she ate, rested, took the herbal tonics he prepared. His care was both professional and deeply personal, a healer's touch infused with something more intimate. One evening as they sat by the fire, Samuel reading from a book of poetry he'd unearthed from his shelves, a knock at the door startled them both. Samuel set the book aside, moving to the window with the caution of a man used to unexpected trouble. "It's Florence," he said, surprised, "from the trading post." He opened the door to find Florence Hewitt stamping snow from her boots, her husband Hiram behind her with a crate in his arms. "Evening, Doctor," Florence said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Heard Mrs. Reed was ailing. Brought some preserves and dried fruit." Abigail raised an eyebrow at the doctor. Clearly, Samuel's secret practice wasn't as secret as he believed. "That's very kind," Samuel said, helping Hiram with the crate. "But how did you—" "Small communities have big ears," Florence interrupted, removing her bonnet. Her eyes took in the scene, the single cabin room, the domestic touches Abigail had added, the obvious signs of shared living. "Town's talking," she said bluntly. "About us," Samuel clarified. It wasn't a question. "About you taking in a woman," Hiram confirmed, looking uncomfortable. "Living together unmarried." "I was ill," Abigail said, drawing herself up despite her weakness. "Samuel saved my life." "No one's questioning the doctor's intentions," Florence assured her. "He's helped too many of us for that. But Reverend Wallace is concerned about appearances." "Jeremiah Wallace can concern himself with his own affairs," Samuel said. an edge to his voice. He's calling a town meeting, Hiram said apologetically, about the moral condition of Willow Creek. Meaning us, Samuel translated. Florence nodded. Partially, though the mining company's strong-arm tactics have given him plenty else to rail against. Abigail and Samuel exchanged glances. What exactly is happening with frontier mining? Samuel asked. Florence's expression darkened. They're buying up everything they can. Those who won't sell are finding themselves with mysterious property damage, missing livestock. Some have even been threatened directly. Charles Pembroke is behind this, Abigail said quietly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her in surprise. Charles Pembroke, the banker from Kansas City? Hiram asked. How would you know him? He's my son-in-law, Abigail admitted, married to my daughter Sarah. Understanding dawned on Florence's face. The woman who left you at our trading post. Abigail nodded, shame burning in her chest. Well, that explains a few things, Florence said grimly. Pembroke was here last week, inspecting properties with his surveyors. Cold as ice, that one. Looks at people like they're figures in an account book. Did Sarah come with him? Abigail asked, hating the hope that crept into her voice. Florence shook her head. He was alone. Well, not counting the hired muscle that follows him everywhere. Hiram shifted uncomfortably. We should go. Storm's coming in. Florence nodded but paused at the door. Watch yourselves, she warned. Wallace isn't the only one asking questions about you two. Pembroke was mighty interested when he heard about the doctor taking in a widow. After they'd gone, silence filled the cabin. Samuel stood at the window, watching snow begin to fall again, his profile outlined against the darkening glass. I'm ruining your reputation, Abigail said finally. I don't give a damn about reputation, he replied without turning. Perhaps I should go, once the weather clears. The words hurt to say, but she couldn't bear being the cause of more trouble for him. Now Samuel did turn, his expression fierce. Go where, Abigail? Back to Sarah, who abandoned you? To some boarding house alone? Or perhaps you'd prefer to freeze to death on the journey? I can't stay here forever, she said, though nothing would have pleased her more. Why not? The simple question hung in the air between them. Because, Abigail faltered, because people will talk. Let them. Because it isn't proper. Proper. Samuel crossed the room to kneel before her chair. Was it proper for your daughter to leave you with nothing? Is it proper for her husband to threaten honest people off their land? His voice softened. Is it proper for me to love you, Abigail Reed? Because I do. God help me, I do. The declaration stole her breath. Samuel, I'm 63 years old. And I'm 48. Neither of us is young, but we're not dead yet either. He took her hands in his. I wasted 5 years living with ghosts. I don't want to waste whatever time I have left. What are you saying? Abigail whispered. I'm saying stay. Not as my house guest, not as my patient, as my wife. Abigail stared at him, heart pounding. This is madness. No, Samuel countered. Madness was watching you nearly die and not telling you how I feel. Madness would be letting you walk away because of what some small-minded preacher thinks. I have nothing to offer you, she protested weakly. You have you, Samuel said simply. That's all I want. For a moment, Abigail allowed herself to imagine it. A life here with this man, mornings cooking breakfast together, evenings by the fire, working side by side in garden and home. Love, unexpected and precious, but reality intruded. Charles and Sarah, she said, if they're asking questions about us, they must have some plan, the gold vein. Let me worry about Charles Pembroke, Samuel interrupted. Just tell me you'll stay. Abigail looked into his eyes, seeing the boy she'd taught, the man he'd become, the husband he offered to be. Slowly she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay. Samuel's face transformed with joy. He leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. We'll face them together, he said firmly. Town, daughter, anyone who's got a problem. Together. Abigail nodded. Together. The letter arrived a week later. Samuel returned from the trading post, his expression troubled as he handed Abigail the envelope, bearing Sarah's elegant handwriting. Abigail's hands trembled as she broke the seal. She read in silence, her face going pale, then blank. "What does it say?" Samuel asked quietly. Abigail set the letter down carefully on the table. "She sent money, $75. Her voice cracked. "Says I should find lodging away from this area, that this arrangement is inappropriate." Samuel's jaw clenched. "That girl?" "Don't," Abigail interrupted sharply. "Don't say anything about my daughter." "Your daughter threw you away like trash," Samuel said, rare anger breaking through. "And now she has the gall to judge where you found shelter?" "She's still my daughter," Abigail insisted, though the words lacked conviction. "Then why isn't she here?" Samuel's voice rose. "Why isn't she the one taking care of you? Why is it some stranger she thinks is taking advantage?" "Maybe she's right," Abigail shouted back, her own anger flaring. "Maybe I am ruining your life. Maybe you should what? Leave? Go where, Abigail? Back to that bench?" The words hit like a slap. Abigail stood abruptly, moving to the corner where her carpetbag still sat. She began shoving clothes into it, tears streaming down her face. "What are you doing?" Samuel demanded. "What I should have done weeks ago." Her voice broke. "I won't be your shame, Samuel. I won't be the town scandal." "You don't get to decide what I deserve," he said, crossing the room but stopping just short of touching her. "I know what I deserve. I deserve to be alone, to spend the rest of my life with ghosts. That's what I earned when I couldn't save my wife, my son." He paused, voice breaking. "But you made me think maybe I get a second chance. Maybe God isn't done with me yet." His eyes shone with unshed tears. "Don't take that away." Abigail stared at him, chest heaving. "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like loving someone who doesn't love you back." "The hell I don't," Samuel countered fiercely. "I buried my wife and baby. You think I don't understand loss? You think I don't understand giving everything and getting nothing back?" The fight drained out of her. She sank onto the bed, bag forgotten. They sat in silence for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, wind howled. Finally, Abigail stood. She walked to the hearth and pulled out the stack of unsent letters she'd written to Sarah over the years. Dozens of them, pouring out her heart to a daughter who never wrote back. One by one, she fed them to the flames. Samuel watched, saying nothing. "I was writing to a ghost," Abigail said softly when the last letter curled into ash. "Just like you were living with one." She turned to face him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." Samuel opened his arms. She walked into them, and they held each other while the letters burned, the past turning to smoke. Rising up the chimney, gone. That night, Abigail woke from troubled dreams. The cabin was dark, the fire burned down to embers. Samuel's pallet by the hearth was empty. A moment of panic seized her. Had he left? Then she heard it, the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood. At this hour, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she moved to the window. In the moonlight, she could see Samuel, stripped to his shirt despite the cold, attacking a pile of logs as if they had personally offended him. Each swing was powerful, precise, fueled by emotion rather than necessity. They had plenty of firewood already stacked. This was something else. Therapy. Release. Abigail watched him work, the muscles in his back and arms visible, even through his shirt, moving with the fluid strength of a man accustomed to physical labor. Sweat gleamed on his face despite the frigid air. His breath came in clouds, matching the rhythm of the axe. There was something mesmerizing about his movements, something primal and deeply masculine. Abigail felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with her shawl. She must have made some sound, because suddenly Samuel stopped, turning toward the window. Their eyes met through the glass, his still fierce with exertion, hers wide with an emotion she couldn't name. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Then Samuel set down the axe and strode toward the cabin. The door opened. He stood in the threshold, chest heaving, hair damp with sweat despite the cold. "You should be resting," he said, his voice rough. "I heard you," Abigail replied simply. Samuel ran a hand through his hair. "I needed to. I couldn't sleep. Because of me, because of what I said." He didn't deny it. "I never meant to trap you here, Abigail. If you truly want to leave—" "I don't," she interrupted. "I was afraid, not of you, but of this." She gestured between them. of wanting something I shouldn't have at my age. Who decides what we should want? Samuel asked, stepping closer. Who makes these rules about when love is appropriate? Society, propriety, common sense. But even as she listed them, the objections seemed hollow. I don't care about society, Samuel said, and propriety be damned. As for common sense, he was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. There's nothing sensible about how I feel for you. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin. Tell me to stop, he whispered. Tell me this isn't what you want, and I'll never mention it again. Abigail leaned into his touch. I can't lie to you, she said softly. Not when you look at me like that. It was all the permission Samuel needed. His lips found hers, gentle at first, then with growing intensity. His arms encircled her, drawing her against him. Abigail's hands moved to his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her palm. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since Christmas, he confessed. I've wanted you to, Abigail admitted, a blush warming her cheeks. Samuel smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his face. Then why are we still standing in the doorway letting the cold in? He closed the door behind them, shutting out the winter night. Inside, the embers glowed red in the hearth, casting the cabin in a warm, intimate light. Without speaking, Samuel added logs to the fire, coaxing it back to life. Abigail stood watching him, this man who had rescued her from abandonment, nursed her through illness, and now offered her his heart. A man haunted by his past, yes, but fighting for his future, their future. When he turned back to her, the look in his eyes made her feel young again, desired, cherished. Are you sure about this? She asked, suddenly self-conscious about her aging body, the silver in her hair, the lines around her eyes. Samuel crossed to her, taking her hands in his. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, he said. I love you, Abigail Reed. Every line on your face, every silver hair. They're the map of a life well lived, a life I want to be part of for whatever time we have left. His honesty humbled her. And I love you, Samuel Thornton. The boy who asked about stars, the doctor who saves lives in secret, the man who gave me a home when I had none. They came together again, this time without hesitation or doubt. Their kiss deepened, hands exploring, hearts racing. As Samuel led her toward the bed, Abigail felt decades fall away. Not because she felt young again, but because age ceased to matter. There was only this moment, this connection, this love blooming against all odds in the heart of winter. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in silence. Inside the cabin, two souls long accustomed to loneliness discovered the healing power of touch, of trust, of surrender. And for the first time in years, neither dreamed of ghosts. The town meeting was called for the last Saturday in January. A notice went up at the trading post, announcing that Reverend Jeremiah Wallace would address matters of moral concern at Willow Creek's small church. We don't have to go, Samuel said when Florence brought word. It's none of their business. If we don't go, it only confirms what they already think, Abigail countered. Besides, hiding isn't going to stop Charles's plans. In the 2 weeks since Sarah's letter, they had settled into a new rhythm. Samuel had formally moved from the pallet to the bed, no longer pretending they were merely landlord and tenant. They worked together during the days, Samuel teaching Abigail about his patients, Abigail helping organize his medical records and supplies. At night, they discovered each other with the wonder of young lovers and the patience of those who knew time's value. Abigail had thought that part of her life was long over. Samuel showed her how wrong she'd been. The morning of the town meeting dawned clear and cold. Abigail dressed carefully in her best dress, a navy blue wool that Sarah had sent 2 Christmases ago, never worn until now. She twisted her hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck, securing it with the pearl pin from Samuel's mother. Samuel, too, made an effort, trimming his beard, wearing a clean white shirt and black suit that had hung unworn in the wardrobe. He looked distinguished, professional, the doctor he truly was beneath the frontiersman exterior. You look beautiful, he told her as they prepared to leave. Abigail smiled, touching the lines at the corners of her eyes. I look my age. Yes, Samuel agreed, taking her hand, and it suits you perfectly. They rode to town together on Samuel's horse, Abigail seated sideways in front of him, his arms around her to hold the reins. The position was both practical and protective, a statement to anyone who saw them approaching. Willow Creek was little more than a cluster of buildings around a crossroads. The trading post, the church, a saloon, a small hotel, and a dozen houses. Larger than an outpost, smaller than a proper town. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, where strangers were noticed and remembered. As they rode down the main street, Abigail felt the stares. Women on porches paused in their sweeping. Men outside the saloon fell silent, watching their approach. Children playing in the snow stopped to point. "Quite the entrance we're making," Abigail murmured. "Let them look," Samuel replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "We have nothing to be ashamed of." The church was a simple, white-clapboard building with a small steeple. Outside, hitching posts were already crowded with horses and wagons. It seemed the entire community had turned out for Reverend Wallace's meeting. Samuel helped Abigail down from the horse, offering his arm as they approached the church steps. She took it, chin high, refusing to show any hint of embarrassment or regret. They entered to find the small sanctuary already packed. Ranchers, miners, shopkeepers, their wives and children. Every head turned as they appeared in the doorway. A murmur swept through the crowd. At the front, Reverend Wallace stood at the pulpit, a tall, thin man with a severe expression and Bible clutched in one hand. His eyes narrowed at the sight of them. "Ah," he said, his voice carrying easily in the hushed room. "Dr. Thornton, Mrs. Reed, how appropriate that you've joined us today." Samuel nodded curtly, guiding Abigail to an empty space on the last pew. They sat together, shoulders touching, united against the judgment they could feel radiating from the congregation. "As I was saying," Wallace continued, "we gathered today to address matters that threaten the moral fabric of our community. First among these is the troubling situation of unmarried persons living under one roof." His gaze fixed on Samuel and Abigail. "It has come to the attention of this congregation that Dr. Thornton has been harboring Mrs. Reed in his home for nearly 3 months, unchaperoned and unwed. This arrangement not only flouts God's law, but sets a dangerous example for our young people." A woman in the front row nodded vigorously. A man muttered agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at the couple in question. "Do you deny these accusations?" Wallace demanded, staring directly at them. Samuel stood, his voice calm but carrying. "There's nothing to deny, Reverend. Mrs. Reed needed shelter when her daughter abandoned her at the trading post. I provided it. Would you rather I had left her to freeze?" Wallace's face reddened. "There are proper channels for charity, Doctor. Boarding houses, women's aid societies. None of which exist within 50 miles of here," Samuel interrupted. "And Mrs. Reed was ill, near death with pneumonia not 3 weeks ago. Would God have preferred I let her die alone rather than care for her under my roof?" A murmur ran through the congregation, some supportive, some disapproving. Wallace's lips thinned. "The issue is not your medical care, Doctor, but the other arrangements that have developed." Now Abigail stood, her voice clear and steady. "If you mean to ask whether Dr. Thornton and I have developed feelings for each other, the answer is yes. If you mean to ask whether we intend to marry, the answer is also yes." This announcement caused a greater stir. Gasps, whispers, 1 or 2 supportive calls from the back. "Well, that's—" Wallace seemed momentarily flustered. "That would certainly rectify the immediate moral concern." However, he was interrupted by the church door opening with a bang. All heads turned to see a well-dressed man in an expensive overcoat stride in, flanked by 2 rough-looking men whose bulging coats suggested concealed weapons. Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. "Charles," she whispered. Charles Pembroke surveyed the crowded church with cold eyes, his gaze finally settling on Abigail and Samuel. A thin smile spread across his handsome features. "My apologies for the interruption," he said smoothly. "I didn't realize there was a meeting today. My associates and I were simply stopping by to pay our respects to Reverend Wallace." "Mr. Pembroke," Wallace said, clearly surprised but pleased, "we're honored by your presence. Please join us." Charles and his men moved to seats near the front, but Charles's eyes never left Abigail. The message was clear. He had found her, and whatever he planned, it wouldn't be good. Wallace cleared his throat. "As I was saying, while marriage would address the immediate concern about propriety, There are other matters that are troubling our community. The aggressive tactics of certain business interests, for example. Perhaps we should address one moral crisis at a time, Reverend, Charles interrupted smoothly. After all, when a respected widow is taken advantage of by a local practitioner, that surely takes precedence over business matters. Samuel stiffened beside Abigail. No one is taking advantage of anyone, Mr. Pembroke. Charles turned in his seat, eyebrows raised in false concern. Dr. Thornton, is it? Forgive me, but when an elderly woman of some means is separated from her family and suddenly announces her intention to marry a frontier doctor of questionable background, one must wonder about motives. Charles, Abigail said, finding her voice at last, this is none of your concern. On the contrary, Mother Reed, Charles replied, emphasizing the title with faint mockery. As your son-in-law, your welfare is very much my concern. Sarah has been beside herself with worry since learning of your situation. The lie was so blatant, Abigail almost laughed. Sarah abandoned me at the trading post with $20 in directions to a non-existent boarding house, she said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. She hasn't written in months except to send money with instructions to leave the area. A shocked murmur ran through the church. Charles's smile became strained. You misunderstood, Mother Reed. Sarah arranged for the finest accommodations in Helena. There must have been some confusion about transportation. There was no confusion, Samuel cut in. Mrs. Reed was deliberately left behind. I witnessed it myself. Charles's eyes hardened. And how fortunate that you were there to rescue her, Doctor. Almost as if you were waiting for the opportunity. The insinuation hung in the air. Samuel took a step forward, but Abigail caught his arm, restraining him. Why are you really here, Charles? She asked quietly. The banker straightened his already immaculate cuffs. To bring you home, of course. Sarah and I have arranged for you to stay at an excellent facility in St. Louis, specifically designed for elderly ladies of quality who can no longer manage independent living. An asylum, Samuel translated, his voice tight with anger. You want to lock her away. A retirement home, Charles corrected smoothly, with medical supervision. After all, at her age, with her health concerns, he extracted a folded document from his pocket. I have the papers here, signed by 2 physicians attesting to her incapacity to manage her own affairs. Fury rose in Abigail's chest. I am perfectly capable. Of course you believe so, Charles interrupted with patronizing gentleness. But these delusions about marriage, about your daughter abandoning you, these are signs of deterioration, Mother Reed. We only want what's best for you. The congregation watched in stunned silence as the drama unfolded. Reverend Wallace seemed uncertain which side to take, the wealthy banker offering Christian charity or the local couple defending their unconventional arrangement. Samuel's hand found Abigail's, squeezing it reassuringly. Mr. Pembroke, he said, his voice deadly quiet, I am a licensed physician, a graduate of Harvard Medical School, and a former Army surgeon. I can assure you that Mrs. Reed is a perfectly sound mind. A physician? Charles raised an eyebrow. I understood you were a trapper, or perhaps a miner. I am whatever I need to be, Samuel replied evenly. And what Mrs. Reed needs is not an asylum in St. Louis, but protection from those who would use her for their own ends. Charles's face darkened. Be careful of your accusations, Doctor. It's not an accusation, Samuel countered. It's a fact. You want Abigail out of the way because she knows about the gold on her former property. The gold you and Frontier Mining are so eager to extract that you're willing to threaten an entire community. A gasp rippled through the church. Charles's composure slipped for the first time. I have no idea what you're talking about, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Abigail stepped forward, drawing herself to her full height. Thomas found the vein before he died, she said clearly. He left me a map and a letter, which I have in my possession. He kept it secret because he feared what mining companies would do to our land, our neighbors. And he was right to worry, Samuel added. Frontier Mining has been pressuring landowners, causing accidents, making threats, all to get at that gold. Charles signaled to his men, who moved closer, hands drifting toward their concealed weapons. This is slander, he said coldly. I'll not stand for it. It's the truth, came a voice from the back of the church. Ezra Harper stood, his weathered face set with determination. My barn burned last month after I refused to sell. Company man told me Next time it might be my house with my family in it. Another man stood. They poisoned my well when I wouldn't sign the papers. A woman rose, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. My husband was beaten when he complained about the survey stakes on our property. One by one, others joined in, each with a story of intimidation or violence. Charles's face grew paler with each accusation. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "These people are obviously in league with you, doctor, paid to tell these lies." "No one's being paid," Samuel replied calmly, "but they are in my debt. I've treated their injuries, the ones caused by your hired thugs, without charge. I've delivered their babies, set their bones, lanced their infections when they couldn't afford Doc Powell's fees." The revelation sent another ripple through the congregation. Many nodded in confirmation. "So you admit to practicing medicine without a license?" Charles seized on this, desperate to change the subject. "Another crime to add to your list, doctor." "My license is current and valid in 3 states, Samuel corrected. "I simply choose to treat those who need it rather than those who can pay." Reverend Wallace, who had been watching the exchange with growing alarm, finally found his voice. "This is all very disturbing," he said, "but we've strayed far from our original purpose, which was to address the moral question of—" "There is nothing immoral," Samuel interrupted. He turned to face the congregation. "I love Abigail Reed. I intend to marry her, with or without your blessing. We are both adults, both widowed, both free to choose our own path." "And I love Samuel Thornton," Abigail added, her voice ringing clear in the hushed church. "The most honorable, compassionate man I've ever known." She faced Charles directly. "I will not go to St. Louis. I will not be locked away to make your gold mine more convenient. And I will not be ashamed of finding happiness in the midst of abandonment." Charles signaled to his men, who moved menacingly closer. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You're coming with us, Mother Reed, for your own good." Samuel stepped in front of Abigail protectively. "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." The tension in the church was palpable as the 2 men faced off, Charles's hired guns tensing for action. Then, from the back of the church, a new voice spoke, female, familiar, and entirely unexpected. "That's enough, Charles. Leave my mother alone." Every head turned. Standing in the doorway, snow-dusting her elegant cloak, was Sarah Pembroke. The church fell silent as Sarah Pembroke stepped inside, removing her gloves with deliberate calm. She was a striking woman of 39, her native heritage evident in her high cheekbones and straight black hair, though she carried herself with the cultivated poise of Boston finishing schools. "Sarah," Charles recovered first, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Darling, I didn't expect you until tomorrow. What a pleasant surprise." "I'm sure," Sarah replied coolly, her gaze traveling from her husband to Abigail. For a moment, mother and daughter stared at each other across the crowded church, years of unspoken hurt hanging between them. Abigail felt Samuel's hand tighten around hers. She drew strength from his touch, refusing to look away from the daughter who had abandoned her. "Sarah," she said simply. Sarah's expression remained unreadable as she moved down the aisle, elegant in her expensive traveling clothes. She stopped several feet away from her mother, maintaining a careful distance. "I received your letter, Charles," she said, addressing her husband without looking at him. "The one explaining how you plan to have my mother declared incompetent and committed to Lakewood Asylum." Charles's face flushed. "It's a retirement home, my dear. For her protection." "It's an asylum," Sarah cut him off. "I visited it last month. The women there are drugged into compliance. Some are chained to their beds." Now she did look at him, her dark eyes flashing. "Did you think I wouldn't investigate before allowing my mother to be sent there?" A murmur rippled through the congregation. Charles's composure slipped further. "This is hardly the place for a private family discussion, darling." "On the contrary," Sarah replied, "since you've chosen to make my mother's situation a public matter, we'll resolve it publicly." She turned to face Abigail directly. "Mother, are you being held against your will?" Abigail straightened her spine. "No, I am exactly where I choose to be." "And do you wish to leave with Charles and me today?" "I do not." Sarah nodded as if confirming something she already knew. "Then that settles it. Mother stays where she is." Charles stepped forward, voice lowered to an angry hiss. Have you lost your mind? Everything we've worked for is built on theft and lies, Sarah finished for him. She turned to address the stunned congregation. My husband's company has been systematically forcing people from their lands. Those who resist face intimidation, property damage, or worse. I have documented proof, letters, financial records, sworn statements from company men. Sarah, Charles grabbed her arm. Stop this immediately. One of his hired men moved forward, but froze when Samuel stepped between them, his stance making it clear he would protect both women. Let go of my daughter, Abigail said, her voice cutting through the tension. To everyone's surprise, Charles complied, releasing Sarah's arm as if burned. He straightened his jacket, struggling to regain composure. This is absurd. My wife is clearly distraught. Traveling in her condition. I'm not distraught, Charles. I'm finally seeing clearly. Sarah removed a sheaf of papers from her handbag. These are copies of internal frontier mining documents detailing the location of the gold vein on my mother's former property and the company's plans to acquire it by any means necessary. She handed them to Reverend Walls, who accepted them with visible confusion. The originals are already on their way to the territorial governor and federal marshals, she added. Charles's face had gone ghostly pale. You've destroyed us, he whispered. No, Sarah countered. I've stopped you from destroying others. She turned back to Abigail. I owe you an explanation, Mother, but not here, not like this. Abigail's heart pounded in her chest. After months of abandonment, years of growing distance, her daughter stood before her offering. What? Reconciliation? Justification? She couldn't tell. My home is just outside town, Samuel said quietly. We can speak there. Reverend Wallace, who had been leafing through the documents with increasing alarm, finally found his voice. This meeting is clearly, that is to say, in light of these revelations. He struggled to regain control of the situation. Perhaps we should adjourn to consider these serious allegations. We will reconvene next Sunday to address our original moral concerns. No one paid him any attention. The congregation was too busy watching the drama unfold between the banker, his wife, and the woman who had become the talk of Willow Creek. We're leaving, Charles announced, signaling to his men. Sarah, come. No, Sarah's refusal was quiet but firm. I'm staying with my mother. We have much to discuss. Charles's face contorted with fury. You would choose her? After everything I've given you? What you've given me was built on other people's suffering, Sarah replied. I can't be part of that anymore. For a moment it seemed Charles might resort to force. His men tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons. But the church was filled with witnesses, miners and ranchers, who had suffered at the company's hands. The odds were not in his favor. This isn't over, he said finally, voice tight with controlled rage. Neither of you will get a penny of my money. You'll have nothing. I already have what matters, Sarah replied, moving to stand beside Abigail. Charles stormed out, his men following. The church erupted into excited conversation as soon as the door slammed behind them. Abigail felt lightheaded, events moving too quickly for her to process. Samuel's arm around her waist steadied her. Let's go home, he murmured. The word, home, resonated through her. Yes, the cabin was home now, more than any place had been since Thomas died. As they moved toward the door, congregation members stepped forward, not with condemnation, but with handshakes, murmured support, offers of help. Ezra clapped Samuel on the shoulder. Florence squeezed Abigail's hand. Even Reverend Wallace, looking decidedly uncomfortable, managed a stiff nod. Outside, Charles and his men had already departed, their horses kicking up snow as they galloped toward the hotel. Sarah stood beside a hired buggy, her back straight despite obvious exhaustion. You can ride with us, Samuel offered, helping Abigail onto his horse. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Thank you to Thornton. The journey back to the cabin was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Abigail rode in front of Samuel, his arms around her, providing both physical and emotional support. Sarah followed in the buggy, her expression unreadable. Abigail's mind whirled with questions. Why had Sarah returned? Why now? The daughter who had abandoned her without a backward glance had suddenly appeared as her defender. It made no sense. As they approached the cabin, Samuel leaned forward. Are you all right? He murmured close to her ear. I don't know, Abigail admitted. I never expected to see her again. Do you want me to leave you two alone to talk? Abigail shook her head firmly. No, whatever she has to say, I want you with me. Samuel's arms tightened around her briefly, understanding, support, love. The cabin looked welcoming as they approached, smoke curling from the chimney where they'd banked the fire that morning. Samuel helped Abigail down, then went to assist Sarah from the buggy. It's humble, Abigail said as her daughter approached the cabin, but it's warm. Sarah nodded, taking in the simple structure, the neat wood pile, the path cleared through deep snow. It suits you, she said quietly. Inside, Samuel built up the fire while Abigail prepared tea. Sarah sat at the table, removing her fine wool coat to reveal an elegant traveling dress. Her eyes took in the cabin's interior. The books, the neat organization, the feminine touches Abigail had added. Her gaze lingered on the single bed, but she made no comment. When they were settled with steaming cups, an uncomfortable silence fell. So many years, so many unspoken words between them. Why did you come back? Abigail finally asked. Sarah's hands tightened around her cup. I received a letter from Charles outlining his plan to have you committed to Lakewood. He claimed it was for your own good, but mentioned how convenient it would be to have you out of the way while they developed the mining claim. And you objected? Abigail couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Sarah met her eyes directly. Despite what you may think, Mother, I never wanted to see you harmed. Just abandoned, Samuel interjected, his voice hard. Sarah's gaze shifted to him. You don't know anything about our relationship to Thornton. I know she nearly died of exposure and heartbreak after you left her at that trading post, he countered. I know she nearly died again from pneumonia while you were off in Kansas City living in luxury. Samuel, Abigail placed a restraining hand on his arm. Let her speak. Samuel subsided, though his protective anger remained evident in the set of his jaw. Sarah sipped her tea before continuing. I was angry with you, Mother. I've been angry for a long time. Because you discovered you were adopted, Abigail said softly. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. You knew I knew? I suspected. Your letters changed when you were 16, became colder, more formal, and after you married Charles, they all but stopped. Sarah nodded slowly. I found Martha's journal when I was cleaning the attic. It detailed her relationship with a Blackfoot man named John Two Rivers, how she discovered she was pregnant, how she begged you to raise her child as your own if anything happened to her. Abigail closed her eyes briefly, pain washing over her at the memory. Martha knew her pregnancy was high risk. The doctor had warned her after a childhood illness that childbearing would be dangerous. But she chose to have me anyway, Sarah said. She loved you from the moment she knew you existed, Abigail confirmed. As did I. But you never told me the truth. The accusation hung in the air between them. Abigail sighed deeply. No, I didn't. Why? The question contained years of hurt. Abigail considered her answer carefully. At first, you were too young to understand. Then as you grew, I worried how others would treat you if they knew. A half-Indian child in Blackwater would have faced cruelty, exclusion. So you lied to protect me? There was bitterness in Sarah's voice. I lied because I loved you as my own, Abigail countered, because in my heart you were my daughter. Martha's blood ran in your veins, but my love raised you. The lie became unnecessary to correct. And Father, did he know? Yes, Thomas knew from the beginning. He loved you no less for it. Sarah's composure cracked slightly. I thought you were ashamed of me, of my heritage. Never, Abigail said firmly. I was trying to protect you in the only way I knew how. Sarah fell silent, absorbing this. Samuel rose quietly, adding wood to the fire, giving the women space while remaining supportive with his presence. After I discovered the truth, Sarah finally continued, I was angry, confused. I felt my whole life had been built on lies. When I met Charles, he seemed so certain of everything, so solid, and he didn't care about my heritage. He called it exotic. Her mouth twisted on the word. You never gave me a chance to explain, Abigail said softly. You just withdrew. I was young, hurt, and then too proud to admit I'd been wrong. Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. By the time I realized what Charles really valued was appearances, connections, money, we were already married. And the gold? Samuel asked. When did you learn about that? Sarah glanced at him. Recently, Charles has been fixated on expanding Frontier's operations in Montana for the past year. When I found his correspondence mentioning Mother's old property specifically, I became suspicious. I started collecting evidence, documents he carelessly left in his study. That's why you brought me to Willow Creek, Abigail realized, to get me out of Kansas City while you investigated. Sarah nodded. I meant to collect you on the return journey, but Charles insisted we leave you here, said it would be easier, that he'd send men to bring you to the retirement home later. Her voice broke. I let him convince me it was for the best, that you'd be safe at the boarding house until then. There was no boarding house, Samuel reminded her coldly. I know that now, Sarah admitted. Charles lied to me, too. She looked directly at her mother. I'm sorry, Mother. There's no excuse for what I did, for leaving you there. The apology hung in the air between them. Abigail felt a lifetime of hurt warring with maternal love. Why should I believe you now? She asked. Why should I trust that this isn't another manipulation? Sarah reached into her handbag and withdrew a journal bound in faded red leather. Because I brought this to return to you. Martha's journal. I've kept it all these years. It belongs with you. Abigail took the book with trembling hands, recognizing her sister's handwriting on the yellowed pages. Martha, she whispered. I've read it so many times I know parts by heart, Sarah said. She loved me, and she loved you, trusted you above anyone. She wrote that if her baby had to lose a mother, there was no one better to take her place than you. Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks. She was my little sister. I promised our parents I'd always take care of her. Her voice caught. I failed her in the end. No, Sarah said fiercely. You honored her in the most important way possible. You raised her child with love. She hesitated, then added softly, my child too. My son, James. Abigail looked up, startled. You have a son? Sarah nodded. 8 years old. He's staying with my friend in Helena until she glanced around the cabin, until I knew where I'd be staying. Charles didn't bring him? Samuel asked. Charles doesn't acknowledge him publicly, Sarah said bitterly. James is dark-skinned, too obviously mixed blood to parade in Kansas City society. Abigail's heart clenched for this child she'd never met, facing the very prejudice she'd feared for Sarah. You left him behind when you came here with Charles? I had no choice, Sarah said defensively. Charles would never have allowed him to travel with us. But I couldn't leave him in Kansas City either, not with what I was planning. She straightened her shoulders. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Mother. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know the truth. Abigail studied her daughter's face, the proud tilt of her chin masking vulnerability, the same expression she'd worn as a willful child. Despite everything, maternal love surged within her. Where will you go? She asked. Sarah's composure faltered slightly. I'm not sure. Charles will divorce me, of course, cut me off financially. But I have some jewelry I can sell, enough to start somewhere new with James. You could stay here, Samuel said unexpectedly. Both women turned to look at him in surprise. Not in the cabin, Arnotti clarified. It's too small, but there's an abandoned homestead about 2 miles east. Ezra's son built it before moving to California. It needs work, but it's solid. I couldn't impose, Sarah began. It's not imposition, Samuel interrupted. It's family. The word hung in the air, meaningful beyond its simple syllables. I don't deserve such kindness, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not about deserving, Samuel replied. It's about moving forward. Abigail reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. Stay, she said simply. Let us know James. Let us be a family again. Something broke in Sarah's carefully maintained composure. Her shoulders slumped, tears spilling down her cheeks. I've made so many mistakes, she whispered. We all have, Abigail said, squeezing her hand, but it's never too late to start again. Outside, the winter afternoon was fading into early dusk, shadows lengthening across the snow. Inside the cabin, 3 people bound by circumstance, choice, and blood began the delicate process of forging new connections from the fragments of the past. A week after Sarah's return, the sound of an approaching wagon drew Abigail and Samuel from their afternoon tea. Sarah sat in the driver's seat, But it was the small figure beside her that caught Abigail's attention. A boy of about 8, with straight black hair and deep, serious eyes that took in everything at once. "James," Abigail whispered, her heart constricting at the sight of this grandson she'd never known. Samuel squeezed her hand as they stepped onto the porch. Sarah halted the wagon, leaning down to say something to the boy, who nodded solemnly before jumping down with the agile grace of childhood. "James," Sarah called, "come meet your grandmother." The boy approached with measured steps, studying Abigail with a directness that reminded her so much of Sarah at that age. He stopped a few feet away, hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that seemed both formal and protective. "Hello, James," Abigail said softly. "I'm very happy to meet you." "You're my grandmother?" he asked, his voice clear and unafraid, though tinged with wariness. "Yes, I'm your mother's mother." James tilted his head slightly. "Why haven't I met you before?" The bluntness of childhood. Abigail glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Because grown-ups sometimes make mistakes," Abigail answered honestly. "We get hurt or angry and forget what's important." The boy considered this, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Like when mother and father would fight and he'd go away for days?" Abigail nodded. "Something like that." James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone, turning it over in his palm. "I collect special rocks," he explained. "I brought this one to give to you. It has a fossil inside." He held it out. Abigail accepted it with reverence, examining the tiny spiral embedded in the stone. "It's beautiful, James, thank you." "It's very old," the boy said seriously. "Thousands of years, but it's still here. That's important, I think." Abigail felt tears prick her eyes at the unintentional wisdom. "Yes, it is important." Samuel, who had hung back to give them space, stepped forward. "I'm Samuel," he said, extending his hand. James shook it with surprising firmness. "Are you a doctor? Mother said you're a doctor." "I am." "Do you help people who can't pay?" James asked, his expression suddenly intense. "Father's doctor wouldn't come when our cook's baby was sick because she couldn't pay." Samuel knelt to the boy's level. "I believe everyone deserves care, whether they can pay or not." James nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Good, that's the right way." Abigail watched the exchange with a swelling heart. This boy, her grandson, carried the directness and sensitivity she'd always cherished in Sarah, before hurt and secrets had built walls between them. "Would you like to see inside?" Samuel asked, gesturing to the cabin. James looked to his mother for permission, then nodded eagerly. As they entered, Abigail noticed how the boy's eyes widened at the sight of Samuel's medical supplies neatly arranged on shelves. "Can I look?" he asked, pointing. "Of course," Samuel replied. "James has been fascinated by medicine since he was tiny," Sarah explained quietly to Abigail. "He collects plants and asks endless questions about their healing properties." Abigail watched as Samuel began showing James his stethoscope, explaining how it worked with the kind of patience only someone who truly loved teaching could possess. The boy listened with complete absorption, his earlier wariness melting away. "You can listen to your own heart if you'd like," Samuel offered, helping James position the instrument. The wonder that spread across the boy's face as he heard his own heartbeat for the first time was something Abigail knew she would treasure forever. "It's so loud," James exclaimed, "like a drum." He looked up at Samuel with newfound admiration. "Can you teach me other things too?" "I'd be honored," Samuel replied, his eyes meeting Abigail's over the boy's head. In that shared glance was a world of meaning, the unexpected gift of this child, this connection, this chance to pass on knowledge and love to a new generation. Charles Pembroke made good on his threat to contest the divorce, but his position was weakened considerably when federal marshals arrived to investigate frontier mining's illegal activities. Faced with potential criminal charges, he settled quickly, granting Sarah her freedom, though little else. Sarah and James moved into the abandoned homestead after a community effort to repair its roof and walls. The boy, serious like his mother with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, adapted quickly to frontier life. In the weeks that followed, James became a fixture at the cabin. While Sarah worked on restoring the old homestead, the boy would arrive shortly after breakfast, often with a new specimen, a plant, a rock, an insect, to show Samuel. "Grandma," he called one morning, bursting through the door with something clutched carefully in his hands. Abigail, still adjusting to the name that sent warmth spreading through her chest each time she heard it, looked up from her mending. Look what I found by the creek. He opened his palms to reveal a tiny frog, its emerald skin glistening in the morning light. Abigail set aside her work and peered at the small creature. It's beautiful, James. Do you know what kind it is? The boy shook his head. Dr. Samuel has a book with animals in it. Can we look? Of course. Abigail watched as James carefully placed the frog in a small jar he'd prepared with dampened grass and air holes punched in the lid. His gentleness with all living things never failed to move her. Samuel entered from the back room where he'd been inventorying supplies. I see my assistant has arrived, he said, his eyes crinkling with the smile that had become more frequent since James had entered their lives. I found a frog, James announced, and I need to know if it's the kind that helps with fevers. Mrs. Harper said some frogs can help with fevers. Samuel raised an eyebrow at Abigail, who suppressed a smile. I think Mrs. Harper might have been referring to an old folk remedy, Samuel said diplomatically. Why don't we consult our reference books and then talk about which remedies are supported by science and which are just traditions? The three of them settled at the table with Samuel's medical texts. As they identified the frog, a common spring peeper, not medicinal but important to the ecosystem, Abigail marveled at how naturally they had fallen into their roles. Samuel as teacher, James as eager pupil, and herself as the bridge between them, offering context, encouragement, and the occasional plate of gingerbread. After they'd released the frog back to the creek, James lingered on the porch, unusually hesitant. What's troubling you, James? Abigail asked, recognizing the signs of a child with a question too big to frame easily. I was wondering. He scuffed his boot against the wooden planks. After you and Dr. Samuel get married, what should I call him? The question caught Abigail by surprise. Well, that would be up to you and to Samuel. What would you like to call him? James considered this seriously. He's going to be your husband, which makes him my step-grandfather? That's right. But that's a very long word, James pointed out. And Dr. Samuel is too formal if we're family. You could call me Samuel, came Samuel's voice from the doorway. He'd been listening quietly. Or Sam, if you prefer. My father was called Sam. James shook his head. That doesn't sound right either. He was silent for a long moment, thinking. In school, there's a boy whose father died, and he calls his mother's new husband Papa. Could I call you Grandpa, or is that only for real grandfathers? The naked vulnerability in the question made Abigail's throat tighten. She glanced at Samuel, whose eyes had widened slightly. Samuel came to sit on the porch step beside James. Real grandfathers, he said carefully, are the ones who love their grandchildren and try to teach them good things. Biology is just one way to make a family. Love is another. So it would be all right, James pressed, to call you Grandpa? It would be more than all right, Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. It would be an honor I never thought I'd have. James nodded, matter settled to his satisfaction. Good, because Mother says we're staying here forever now, and I need a grandfather to teach me things. He hopped up, as if the conversation hadn't just fundamentally shifted something in all their lives. Can I help organize your medical supplies now? You promised. As Samuel led the boy inside, Abigail remained on the porch, overwhelmed by the simple, profound magic of what had just occurred. The man who had lost his son before he drew breath had just been claimed as Grandpa by a boy who needed exactly what Samuel had to give: knowledge, patience, and unconditional acceptance. Some wounds, it seemed, were meant to be healed by unexpected blessings. He formed an immediate bond with Samuel, following the doctor on his rounds, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. The gold vein on the Reed property became the subject of legal battles that would take years to resolve. In the meantime, life in Willow Creek continued, the rhythm of seasons marking time's passage. February brought more snow and Samuel's formal return to medical practice. He converted the shed into a small surgery, with Abigail serving as nurse and record keeper. Word spread quickly, bringing patients from outlying homesteads who couldn't afford the town doctor's fees or the journey to Helena. Reverend Paulus, after initial resistance, gradually came to accept the unorthodox household at the edge of his parish. Samuel's undeniable skill as a physician, combined with Abigail's gentle diplomacy, eventually won over even the most conservative members of the congregation. Through it all, Abigail and Samuel's bond deepened. They worked side by side during the day, sharing the satisfaction of healing bodies and easing suffering. At night, they shared the intimacy of the cabin, learning each other's bodies and hearts with the wonder of new lovers and the wisdom of those who had known both joy and grief. One evening in late February, Samuel returned from visiting a patient to find Abigail sitting on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in a heavy blanket, staring at the star-filled sky. "Stargazing like your students used to?" he asked, settling beside her. Abigail smiled, remembering, actually, the night Thomas proposed, we sat under stars like these. She turned to him. "Did you mean what you said in the church about wanting to marry me?" Samuel's eyebrows rose. "Of course I did. I wouldn't have said it otherwise." "Even now? With Sarah and James nearby? With all the complications?" Samuel took her hands in his. "Abigail Reed, I have wanted to marry you since Christmas. Nothing that's happened since has changed that." Abigail's eyes searched his face in the moonlight. "I'm old, Samuel, 63. Most women my age are grandmothers, not brides. And I'm 48. Neither of us is young." He squeezed her hands. "But that just means we understand the value of whatever time we have left. People will talk. Let them." Samuel's voice was firm. "I spent 5 years haunted by what I'd lost. I won't waste another day worrying about what others think." Abigail's expression softened. "When did you become so wise?" "I had a good teacher," he repeated, smiling. Then he grew serious. "Abigail, I love you. I want to build a life with you, however many years we have. I want to wake up beside you, work beside you, grow old beside you." Tears filled Abigail's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Thornton." Their kiss was gentle, reverent, filled with promise. When they broke apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "Spring," he murmured. "When the snow melts, we'll be married in the wildflowers." "Spring, Abigail agreed, feeling her heart bloom despite the winter chill. March brought the first hints of thaw, patches of mud appearing beneath melting snow. Samuel expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the main room to accommodate his growing medical practice. James proved an able assistant, his small hands quick to learn the organization of supplies, his mind sharp enough to remember dosages and preparations. Sarah found work teaching at Willow Creek Small School, her Boston education making her the most qualified instructor the community had ever seen. Slowly, tentatively, mother and daughter rebuilt their relationship, healing old wounds through shared meals, quiet conversations, and the bridge that James provided between them. Abigail discovered, to her surprise, that she enjoyed being a grandmother. James brought out a playfulness she'd thought long buried, a joy she hadn't experienced since Sarah's own childhood. He called her Grandmother Reed at first, then simply Grandmother, and finally, one precious day, Grandma. As April arrived, bringing the first wildflowers pushing through melting snow, wedding preparations began in earnest. Florence organized a quilting circle to create a wedding gift. Ezra and other local men built a proper porch on the cabin. Sarah sewed a simple but elegant dress of blue silk. "To match your eyes, Mother." The ceremony was set for the first Sunday in May, when the meadow would be carpeted with spring blooms. Reverend Wallace, having finally reconciled himself to the match, agreed to perform the ceremony, though not without delivering several sermons on unconventional unions in the weeks prior. 2 days before the wedding, Abigail sat on the new porch, watching Samuel and James construct a garden fence. The boys' laughter drifted on the spring breeze as Samuel showed him how to hammer nails properly. The sight warmed Abigail's heart, this unlikely family they were creating from loss and second chances. Sarah emerged from the cabin, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to her mother, then settled in the neighboring chair. "James adores him," she observed. Abigail nodded. "Samuel is good with him. Patient. He'll be a wonderful step-grandfather." Sarah sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Are you nervous about the wedding?" "A bit," Abigail admitted. "Not about marrying Samuel, but about being the center of attention. I haven't been a bride in 40 years. Sarah smiled. "You'll be beautiful, though I still think you should wear white." "At my age, I'd look ridiculous." "You'd look like a bride," Sarah countered. "Age has nothing to do with it." They fell into comfortable silence, watching Samuel demonstrate proper sawing technique to an attentive James. The afternoon sun gilded the scene in golden light, highlighting the silvery strands in Samuel's hair, the eager posture of the boy. "I never thanked you," Sarah said suddenly. Abigail turned to her, puzzled. "For what?" "For everything. For taking me in when Martha died. For loving me as your own. For giving me a good life." Sarah's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "I spent so many years angry about the lie that I missed the truth beneath it." Abigail felt her throat tighten. "And what truth is that?" "That you loved me enough to do what you thought was best, even when it was hard." Sarah met her mother's eyes directly. "I understand that now, with James. The fierce need to protect. The fear of making the wrong choice." Abigail reached over to take her daughter's hand. "There is no perfect way to mother, Sarah. We all just do our best with what we know at the time." Sarah squeezed her hand in return. "I'm glad you found Samuel. Glad you'll have someone who loves you as you deserve." "As we all deserve," Abigail said softly. Their conversation was interrupted by a shout of triumph from James, who had successfully hammered his first nail. The boy looked up, seeking their approval, his face alight with accomplishment. "Well done," Sarah called. "Perfect," Abigail added. Samuel ruffled the boy's hair, pride evident in his posture. In that moment, with the spring sunlight warming the earth and new life emerging from winter's grip, Abigail felt a contentment she had thought forever beyond her reach. This was family, not defined by blood or convention, but by choice, by love given and received, by second chances grasped with both hands. The night before the wedding, after Sarah had taken James home for a proper night's rest before the celebration, Samuel found Abigail standing by the cradle he had completed, her fingers tracing the intricate scrollwork. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly. Abigail turned, smiling at the worry that creased his brow. "No, just marveling." "At what?" "At how differently everything turned out than I expected." She gestured to the cradle. "This, made for your son, now waiting for a grandson neither of us knew existed months ago." Samuel came to stand beside her, his hand covering hers on the smooth wood. "James asked me something today while you were helping Sarah with the dress alterations." "Oh?" "He wanted to know if, after we're married, he could stay overnight sometimes. He said," Samuel's voice caught slightly, "he said he wants to learn to be a doctor like me, and that means he needs to see how I work early in the mornings and late at night." Abigail smiled. "And what did you tell him?" "That he's welcome anytime. That we'll build him his own small bed in the corner if he likes." Samuel hesitated. "I hope that was all right. I should have discussed it with you first." Abigail leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "It was perfectly all right. That boy adores you, Samuel. You've given him something Charles never did. Attention, respect, guidance." "He's an extraordinary child," Samuel said. "Sharp as a tack, and that curiosity reminds me of myself at that age, always taking things apart to see how they worked." "He reminds me of Sarah before life hardened her," Abigail admitted. "That same directness, that same sensitivity to others. Did you see how he splinted that bird's broken wing last week?" Samuel nodded. "His hands are steady, a natural healer." They stood in companionable silence, contemplating the cradle and all it represented. Loss transformed to hope, endings becoming beginnings. "I've been thinking," Samuel said eventually, "the surgery shed is too small for my practice now. I'd like to build a proper clinic off the main cabin. Nothing grand, just a treatment room and a small waiting area." "That sounds sensible," Abigail agreed. "Your patient list grows every week." "I was thinking James could help with the building. Teach him some carpentry alongside the medicine. Every good doctor should know how to work with his hands." "He'd love that." Samuel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "And I thought if it wouldn't be presumptuous, we might add a small room for James, for when he stays over, or for any other children who might need a safe place for a while." Abigail's heart swelled with love for this man who had rescued her from abandonment, only to keep finding new ways to expand his capacity for care. "Samuel Thornton, you continue to surprise me." "Is that a yes?" "It's a resounding yes." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. "You know, I always wanted more children after Sarah. It wasn't possible with Thomas's health and our circumstances. And now? Now I find myself with a daughter restored to me, a grandson I never knew I had, and a man who opens his heart to them both without hesitation. She smiled through sudden tears. It seems life had more in store for me than I ever imagined. Wedding day dawned clear and bright, the Montana sky an endless blue canvas above the greening landscape. Wildflowers carpeted the meadow beside the cabin, buttercups, lupine, and wild iris creating a natural cathedral. In the small bedroom, Sarah helped Abigail dress, fastening the tiny buttons of the blue silk gown with careful fingers. "There," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "You're beautiful, Mother." Abigail turned to the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back. The dress, with its modestly high collar and long sleeves, flattered her still slender figure. Sarah had arranged her silver-streaked hair in a simple but elegant style, secured with the pearl pin from Samuel's mother. "Something borrowed," Sarah said, draping a delicate lace shawl around Abigail's shoulders. "Mrs. Harper loaned it to me for you." "Something blue," Abigail smiled, touching the silk of her dress. "Something old," Sarah continued, presenting a small velvet box. Inside lay a gold locket Abigail recognized immediately. "Your grandmother's," she breathed, lifting it reverently. Sarah nodded. "I found it among my things when I was packing in Kansas City. I meant to return it to you anyway." Abigail opened the locket to find the tiny portraits still inside, her parents looking young and serious in their formal pose. "Thank you," she whispered as Sarah fastened it around her neck. "And something new," came James's voice from the doorway. The boy stepped into the room, carefully carrying a small bouquet of freshly picked wildflowers tied with ribbon. "They're perfect," Abigail said, accepting them with a kiss to his cheek. A knock at the cabin door announced the arrival of Ezra, who would escort Abigail to the ceremony. "Ready, Mrs. Reed?" he called. "Folks are gathering, and that doctor of yours is pacing a trench in the meadow." Abigail took a deep breath, smoothing her skirt one last time. "Ready?" she replied, surprised at how steady her voice sounded despite the butterflies in her stomach. Outside, the May sunshine caressed her face as she took Ezra's offered arm. A path had been cleared through the wildflowers, leading to where Samuel stood beneath an arch of budding branches. Beside him, Reverend Wallace waited, prayer book in hand. The gathered crowd, nearly everyone from Willow Creek and surrounding homesteads, turned to watch Abigail's approach. She saw Florence dab at her eyes, saw Hiram nod approvingly, saw children watching wide-eyed from their parents' sides. But mostly she saw Samuel, handsome in his dark suit, beard neatly trimmed, eyes fixed on her with such love it nearly took her breath away. This man who had found her at her lowest moment, who had offered shelter without expectation, who had healed her body and her heart. As she reached him, Samuel extended his hand. Abigail placed her fingers in his, feeling the strength and gentleness of his grip. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Wallace began, his voice carrying across the meadow. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Abigail as she stood facing Samuel, their hands joined, their eyes locked. She had stood like this once before, 40 years ago, young and filled with dreams. Now she stood wiser, tempered by life's joys and sorrows, yet somehow more hopeful than that younger bride had been. "Samuel Thornton," Wallace continued, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" "I do," Samuel said, his voice deep and sure. "I surely do." "Abigail Reed, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" "I do," Abigail replied, feeling joy rise within her like a spring tide. They exchanged simple gold bands that Samuel had ordered from Helena, each engraved inside with their initials and the date. When Reverend Wallace pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. The celebration that followed was joyous, the community embracing the union they had once questioned. Tables laden with food, music from local fiddle players, children playing games, a proper frontier wedding feast. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, Abigail found herself watching Samuel across the gathering. He was talking with Ezra and James, his expression animated as he explained something to the fascinated boy. Sensing her gaze, he looked up, a smile spreading across his face. He excused himself and crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his. "Happy Mrs. Thornton?" he asked. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. "Very," she replied. "And you, de Thornton?" "More than I ever thought possible." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I have something to show you. Can you slip away?" Intrigued, Abigail allowed him to lead her away from the celebration, toward the barn. Inside, lantern light revealed something covered with a cloth in the center of the clean-swept floor. "What is this?" she asked. Samuel's expression was a mixture of nervousness and pride as he removed the cloth to reveal the cradle he had begun building for his son years ago. It was finished now, the wood sanded to satiny smoothness, delicate scrollwork adorning the headboard. "Samuel," Abigail breathed, running her fingers over the beautiful workmanship. "I know we won't have children of our own," he said quietly, "but I thought for James when he visits. And maybe someday, if Sarah has more children." Abigail's heart swelled with love for this man, his thoughtfulness, his hope for the future despite past pain. "It's perfect," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "You're perfect." Samuel leaned into her touch. "Not perfect, just trying to be worthy of this second chance." "You are," Abigail assured him. "We both are." Their kiss was unhurried, a promise sealed between them. When they reluctantly returned to the celebration, it was with renewed appreciation for the unlikely journey that had brought them together. As twilight descended, guests began departing with well wishes and knowing smiles. Sarah took James back to their homestead, hugging her mother tightly before leaving. "Be happy," she whispered. "You deserve this." Finally, Abigail and Samuel were alone, standing on the porch of their cabin, their home. Stars emerged one by one in the deepening blue sky. The same stars Samuel had asked about as a schoolboy. The same stars that had witnessed Abigail's long journey from teacher to wife to widow to bride again. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, his arm around her waist. "That life is strange and wonderful," Abigail replied, leaning against him. "That endings can become beginnings if we let them." Samuel nodded, understanding perfectly. "Come inside, wife," he said softly. "The night is just beginning." Hand in hand, they entered their home, closing the door on the outside world. Inside, the fire crackled welcome, casting golden light on the life they had built together. The books they both loved, the medical supplies that represented their shared work, the quilt on their bed sewn by caring hands. Later, as moonlight filtered through the curtains and Samuel slept beside her, Abigail lay awake, marveling at the twists and turns of fate that had led her here. From abandonment at a trading post to love in a frontier cabin. From loneliness to family. From winter's embrace to spring's renewal. In the quiet darkness, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for unexpected joy, for the man whose heartbeat now formed the rhythm of her days. Outside, the Montana night wrapped around their cabin like a protective blanket. Inside, two souls who had known profound loss discovered the healing miracle of new beginnings. And in that sacred space between what had been and what would be, love blossomed against all odds, as resilient and determined as the wildflowers pushing through winter's snow. As summer ripened into early autumn, the expanded cabin stood complete, a bedroom for Abigail and Samuel, the main living area with its stone fireplace, a proper clinic where Samuel treated patients 3 days a week, and a small room with a window facing the sunrise, built specially for James. The boy spent more and more time with them, particularly after Samuel began taking him on his less complicated house calls. 8-year-old James had a natural bedside manner that put even the most reluctant patients at ease, and his quick mind absorbed medical knowledge like a sponge. "Grandpa says I can start learning about setting bones next," James announced one evening as the four of them, Abigail, Samuel, Sarah, and James, shared dinner on the porch, watching fireflies begin to spark in the gathering dusk. "Only the theory," Samuel clarified, exchanging an amused glance with Abigail. "No practical attempts until you're older." "But I already know all the bones in the human hand," James protested. "I can recite them." "Go ahead then," Sarah encouraged, her face softened with pride. James sat up straighter, his face serious as he began. Phalanges, distal, middle, and proximal. Metacarpals 1 through 5. Carpals, scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. Impressive, Samuel interrupted gently. But knowing the names and knowing how to heal are different skills. Medicine takes patience. James sighed dramatically, but his eyes shone with admiration for his grandfather. Yes, sir. Later, after Sarah had taken James home, Abigail and Samuel sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the velvet sky. I received a letter today, Abigail said, breaking the comfortable silence. From the territorial court. Samuel turned to her, eyebrows raised. About the gold vein? Abigail nodded. They've ruled in our favor, or rather in Sarah's favor as my heir. The claim was fraudulently obtained by frontier mining, so the court has reverted ownership to our family. That's significant news, Samuel said carefully. What will you do with it? I've been thinking about that. Abigail gazed out at the darkening landscape. I don't need gold or riches. I have everything I value right here. But James should have opportunities that Sarah and I never had. A proper education, Samuel murmured. Yes, and the freedom to choose his path without financial constraints. She turned to Samuel. I'm thinking of establishing a trust for him, for his education, and perhaps someday, a medical practice of his own if that remains his passion. Samuel squeezed her hand. He'd make a fine doctor. He has a fine teacher, Abigail replied softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, the rhythm of night insects rising around them. Do you ever wonder, Samuel asked eventually, what would have happened if Sarah hadn't left you at that trading post that day? Abigail considered the question. I think about it sometimes. If she'd taken me to Kansas City as planned, I might never have reconnected with James. You and I would never have found each other. So much joy would have been lost. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, Samuel mused. From inside the cabin came the soft ticking of the clock Samuel had brought back from his last trip to Helena, a wedding gift that now marked the peaceful rhythm of their shared days. I received another letter as well, Abigail said, from Reverend Wallace. Samuel raised an eyebrow. The same Reverend Wallace who nearly refused to marry us? Abigail smiled. The very same. He's asked me to consider teaching again. It seems the school board is impressed with Sarah's methods, but feels the school has grown too large for one teacher. And how do you feel about that? I thought my teaching days were behind me, Abigail admitted, but working alongside you, helping explain treatments to patients. It's awakened something I thought was gone. She looked at him. What would you think? If your wife became a school teacher again at 63? Samuel's face softened with love. I think the children of Willow Creek would be extraordinarily fortunate. He brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. And I think it's never too late to use the gifts we've been given. Inside the cabin, on a shelf above the hearth, sat the smooth stone James had given Abigail on their first meeting. The one with the fossil inside, thousands of years old yet perfectly preserved. Beside it stood the wooden bird Samuel had carved for her that first Christmas, its wings spread in eternal flight. Past and present, side by side, loss and renewal, bound together in the tapestry of their unexpected life. As night deepened around them, Abigail leaned her head against Samuel's shoulder, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them here. From abandonment to belonging, from winter's cold embrace to the golden warmth of autumn, from strangers to family. Not bound by blood, but by choice, by love, by the quiet daily decision to build something beautiful from the fragments of what had been broken. And in the small room built especially for him, James's books and collected treasures waited for his next visit. The beginning of a legacy neither Abigail nor Samuel had dared to imagine in their darkest days, yet now stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. The gift of a second chance, seized with both hands.